Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Hope and Cope webinar with Bonnie Harnden. Thank you for attending in such large numbers. I'm Eric Amar, the Executive Director of Hope and Cope, and I'll also be your facilitator this afternoon. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about logistics so that you can all take full advantage of the webinar. Please put your microphones on mute for the duration of the presentation, and either write your questions in the chat option, which you'll see on the left side of your screen, or wait for the question period, which will be at the end. So the pandemic has had significant impacts on people's well-being. Being isolated and unable to get together with friends, family, and work colleagues has taken a toll on our enjoyment of life. Hope and Cope volunteers have provided much needed support to users throughout these long 2 years. In turn, today, we would like to offer you a little bit of support and to help with your own sense of well-being. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Professor Bonnie Harnden, who is a psychoanalyst, couples and family therapist, and associate professor at Concordia University. On behalf of Hope and Cope, I sincerely thank Bonnie for generously offering her time to come and speak to you today, and we are very grateful. Bonnie, I'm handing the microphone to you.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm so happy to be with all of you today, and I'm going to be sharing some research that I've been doing these last couple of years. And we'll do some exercises to help us build resilience, to help us have more, to have less stress, to have more gratitude in our lives. And we'll also probably at moments, I'm going to start sharing my screen, but I'm going to come back to the group in a few minutes, and also we'll do some exercises together to kind of grab some of the theory that I'm going to be talking about. So welcome everybody. And I'll just share my screen here. Hang on, here we go. Okay, so this workshop is coming from Jog in Montreal, and it's located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Jog in Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future of our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So I'm going to start telling you a little bit about how I started becoming interested in the research on awe and gratitude, and how to use it to build resilience. Initially, I was a therapist at the Montreal Children's Hospital, and I worked for over a decade in the emergency with children and adolescents who were presenting to the ER in crisis. And I worked on a team called the Emergency Follow-Up Team, and it dealt with children that were coming in all kinds of different crises: suicidality, anxiety, school refusal. And I worked on a large team that would assess these children and then treat them before referring them into the community. And over time, in working with these children, I became very interested in how external trauma is kind of recycled in family life, how what our ancestors have experienced kind of shows up in the ways that we love and relate. And so I did a lot of research at the hospital working with these suicidal kids, and seeing if they could be treated safely on an outpatient basis to avoid the stigma of hospitalization. And in that process of doing that research, what showed up was that a lot of the kids that were coming into the ER, not all of them, but a good portion of them had trauma. So they were having symptoms of PTSD, and a lot of it was due to family conflict and the way their parents were with them during moments of stress and transition. And so I was involved in several research projects at the hospital, and I became really interested in this idea of how do we disseminate research. A lot of the research that I was working on was ending up in journals, and it wasn't kind of trickling down to people in the front lines that really needed the research, and also the families that I was working with. So at that time, I wrote a play called You Arrive that would disseminate the research through storytelling. And this is a photo of myself with the original cast. And it was really about how trauma is kind of recycled in family life and how to break the cycle of trauma. There's a lot of research coming out right now that shows that we really become in relationship to our families and our communities and our histories, and that history lives in our bodies, that trauma and stress is literally passed down through the process of epigenetics, and what our ancestors have gone through, whether it's the Holocaust or the wars or all kinds of different traumas, actually changes our genetic structure and is kind of played out in our family life. In the same way, love and connection resilience is also passed down. These things are kind of passed down in the ways that we love and relate. And when I was working at the hospital, I became really interested in how do we break the cycle of trauma? How do we kind of change how history can show up in our bodies and in our relationships, and really work towards undoing historical trauma and change. And I worked a lot with parents around this, and I found that if parents were able to kind of remember what they'd experienced as kids, then they could kind of show up differently for their own children. So I became very interested in how trauma shows up, and how does trauma affect us? How does trauma affect our neurological development? We see in children that experience trauma that there's an effect that carries through across the lifespan if they're not treated. So I became very interested in that and how to teach students. I'm a professor at Concordia. I teach graduate students that are going to go on to be therapists, how to work with families and kids. And so I wanted to kind of find a method of teaching that was a little bit more innovative. So I wrote this play, and it combined storytelling and theory. And after really working with traumatized kids for a long period of time, and I work now in private practice with children and adults, I became interested in this idea of how do we heal? How do we thrive? How do we kind of come back into life and into presence? And what are the essential ingredients for thriving? And I was interested in how to help people fall in love with the experience of being alive again. How do we become more resilient after trauma and stress? And how do we kind of use the science on awe and gratitude to kind of make our lives better? And I'm going to present that research to you today. So what I started doing with my graduate students, and here's the first group, we started working on developing a 2-day workshop to combat burnout in frontline mental health clinicians. I work a lot of therapists, and I do a lot of presentations for people in the community that are really working in frontline settings in very stressful situations. And so we wanted to take the research on awe and gratitude and kind of live it together as a group, but also find ways to disseminate the research in a bit more of an innovative way through storytelling, through theater, through art. And so we've been working together on Zoom over COVID to kind of create a workshop process. And I'm going to show you a very condensed version of that research process today. So we've been living the research together. This is one of my graduate students, Hilda, with her garden, and finding all kinds of ways to kind of use the science on awe and gratitude to help our nervous systems heal, and then translate that research in kind of innovative and accessible ways. So I'm going to be talking today about awe and gratitude, and how awe and gratitude can build resilience in us, how it can make us more present, how it can make our lives better. The research on awe and gratitude is unequivocal that when we notice what is working in our lives get better, our relationships get better, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. And we have less inflammation in our bodies. We tend to be healthier overall. We even tend to live longer. There's incredible science showing how awe and gratitude, when we develop ways of kind of facilitating that in our daily experience, has the capacity to heal us and to also make us more present for our lives and to make us more present for suffering. So one of the things that's really important about the research process that we've been talking about is that it's not about avoiding suffering. It's more about using the science of gratitude and awe to become more present for the good and also for the more challenging aspects of our lives, that we want to be present for both. We want to be able to be with and notice both and engage with both. So I'm going to go through the kind of research on awe and gratitude, and I'm going to talk about the nervous system, and I'm going to talk about the vagus nerve because it's very implicated in the nervous system, and there's just incredible research coming out about how to heal our nervous systems that we're going to cover. So, one of the things that is so important to think about is that we tend to have a bit of a negativity bias in us, that it's kind of how we've survived for millions of years as animals. We tend to look in our environment for signs of danger much more before we look towards what's working. We tend to look for what's not working in our environment. And we're kind of primed to notice danger in our environment or to notice what's not working. And that gets reinforced over time. And what they're showing in the research is that although this is important and it helps us, be careful and survive danger and react when we need to, that a lot of people get stuck in noticing what's not working. And they're showing in the research that the downward spiral effect, which I'll talk about, which is very implicated in depression, is where we notice what's not working and we ruminate on it, and then we become depressed, and it creates this kind of downward spiral effect. We're going to be talking about the opposite of that, building something called the upward spiral effect. So we're going to be talking a little bit about, can everyone see my PowerPoint, by the way? Yeah, good. Okay. So this idea of retraining our eyes to see beauty, and that can be vast beauty, that can be kind of ordinary moments of beauty, and also noticing the good in our relationships. So we're going to be working on this idea of building this upward spiral effect, which I'm going to talk about. And Fredrickson has written all kinds of research about this. She's done wonderful research in the States about this idea of broaden and build. So what they're showing in the research, and I'm going to talk about this a lot more as we go, that when we generate positive emotion, we tend to have much more resilience. We tend to recover from stressful events much faster than we would normally. And we also tend to see the bigger picture. So when people generate negative emotions, they tend to kind of have much more rigid ways of actually seeing and seeing problems. They see problems in rigid ways. When positive emotion is generated, and this has been replicated in numerous studies, we tend to notice the big picture, and we tend to be much more, see multiple possibilities for solving a problem. And we tend to, in negotiations, work towards more win-win ways of resolving conflict. But I'll talk about that in more detail as we go. So a lot of the therapists that I train at the university go on and work in frontline settings with children and families with a lot of trauma. And so I became very interested in this idea of building capacity to stay present. So one of the most important things in any kind of work, and a lot of the work that you're doing at HopeandCope as volunteers, is this idea of being present and holding space for people. So showing up and offering support in a kind of present way. And one of the things that's very clear in the research is that when we are stressed, our frontal lobes turn off, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when I go through the nervous system, but we're not present when we're stressed. And when we're in a more resilient, generating positive emotion state, that I'm going to talk about a more what we would call a parasympathetic state, we're much more present for the beauty of life, and we're much more present for the suffering of life. And we have more capacity to stay present and come back to presence again and again and again. So the research is really pointing to this. When we lean in to what's working in our relationships, in the world, when we generate it and stay with it a little bit longer, and I'm going to give you some skills for how to do that, then we have much more presence when we need to engage with suffering or something that's challenging, and we tend to return from stress much faster. So we don't stay in what we would call a hyper-sympathetic state, a hyper-vigilant state for long periods of time. We can kind of come back and stay present. So I'm going to talk about that and how awe and gratitude really can help us heal from trauma, but it can also prevent PTSD. It helps us become more resilient, And I've kind of already been talking about this, but it helps us be more regulated. So, one of the hallmarks of adulthood, and something we really want to build in our children, is this capacity to regulate. So, affect regulation really means our capacity to think and feel and to stay present. That if something upsetting happens, we can be upset, but we return from that upsetness to being more regulated. And when people have a lot of nervous system trauma and stress, when something happens that's stressful, it takes them much longer to return to this kind of more present, regulated state. And what they're showing in the research is that when we kind of do these things to notice what's working and have gratitude, we heal our nervous system. And I'll actually talk about the mechanisms of that in a minute. And we tend to regulate faster and come back faster. So I'm going to kind of run through more of that. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is that trauma and stress, and having a lot of stress in our nervous systems, creates an internal dialogue that can be quite self-critical or critical of others. And gratitude and awe can also help us change our internal dialogue. So we're going to talk a little bit about the way we listen, the way we see, and the conversations that we have with ourselves and with the world. And we're going to talk about moments of ordinary magic, moments of noticing simple moments of beauty and staying with them longer. I'm going to talk a little bit, when you're a child and you chew a piece of gum and you stretch it out, we're going to talk about stretching out the moments of beauty and how when we do that, we're literally taking in a multivitamin of goodness. We're actually helping our bodies heal and reset. It seems like such a simple thing, but it's actually very effective. We're also going to be talking about noticing the beauty in each other, and gratitude in relationships. In all of these huge studies, shows again and again and again that when we're grateful for the good in the people around us, that the relationship improves on multiple scales. And I'll talk about that a lot more. One of the most amazing, I'll just tell you one little thing that I was reading, in that when people generate gratitude for a friend or a partner or a child, they don't even have to say it to their partner or child or friend, and it improves the relationship. There's a bit of an effect. And when people generate gratitude for each other, conflict heals much quicker, and couples show much more relationship satisfaction over time. We're also going to be talking a little bit about gratitude at work, because one of the best ways to have the benefits of gratitude is to receive gratitude and to be seen for what one is doing. And I'll talk about that more as we go. So one of the really interesting things about the research on awe and gratitude and learning is that it really shows that we want to lean into what we already love and do more of that. So when they talk about, in the research, healing our nervous systems and combating stress, they also talk about people need to build from what they already know and love. We used to think that learning happened when we would feel stressed or criticized or receiving harsh feedback. But what they're showing in the research is that we actually learn when we feel safe and settled. And learning is a little bit like this branch where in our neurons, we actually build off what we already know and love. And there's a lot of evidence that part of leaning into what you love more builds this upward spiral effect that I'm going to talk more about. So one of the things you could maybe be holding in your mind is, what do you already love and would you like to do more of? And just holding that in your awareness as we go. What do you already love and you would like to do more of? And also, what do you already know and you'd like to learn more about? So one of the poems that's been really important in our research process that I'll just read, that I really love, that really speaks to this idea of loving what you love. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. So that poem has become very important for my students and I because it really speaks to this idea of leaning into more to what we love and coming back into feeling more belonging and common humanity. And the research on gratitude is very interesting in that when people generate feelings of awe and gratitude, they become more altruistic and they're more in touch with a feeling of common humanity and helpfulness and altruism. So there's really this idea that we've been talking a lot about at the university of moving from a state of me and being less preoccupied with ourselves and our own worries and fears. And one of the things they're showing in the research is that when people are entitled, they're more depressed and more anxious. So it's moving out of a state of entitlement into a state of a more common humanity. And through that, being more present, being more in the moment. And also, we're going to talk about it if there's time, the power of nature to also heal our nervous systems and to help build this upward spiral effect. This is another quote that's been important to our research process. And this is by Robin Wall Kilmar, who wrote the beautiful book Braiding Sweetgrass. She says, "We can choose. If the world is a commodity, how poor we grow. When the world is a gift in motion, how wealthy we become." So as we get into the research on gratitude, I want you to think about how can you see your lives more as a gift in motion and your relationships as a gift in motion. And I'll read another poem that's been important in the research process. This is Joy Harjov. She's an Indigenous poet, and she wrote the beautiful book Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. She says, "When I woke up from a 40-year-old sleep, I could hear the drums in the village. I felt the sweat of ancestors in each palm. The singers were singing the world into place, even as it continued to fall apart. They were making songs to turn hatred into love." So one of the things that's so interesting in the research is that we tend to catch each other's emotions and we tend to catch each other's nervous systems. So if we're stressed, we will transmit that stress to the people that we're around. And that's been kind of shown in all kinds of different research processes. So when we learn to kind of regulate and use the science on gratitude to be more present and more regulated and more calm, we actually share that regulated nervous system with each other. So we're literally working on how to kind of change our nervous systems and bodies so we can share our regulation with each other. So trauma and stress tend to really take us out of the present moment, and awe and gratitude can really bring us back. And I became really interested in that with my parents, and I all of us have all kinds of, trauma and stress and hardship unfolding in our lives. And my mother, this is a photo of my mother right at the beginning when she was beginning to become more, she has Alzheimer's, and she was beginning to get more and more advanced. And this was a moment in a restaurant where my dad was kind of helping her eat, and he kind of leaned in and put his head on her head. And it was a moment of deep beauty amidst deep hardship. And that's what the research is really pointing to. And I'm going to show you a video of my mom in a moment of when there's something challenging happening, someone is sick, and we need to engage with that, and we need to be present for that. We also want to lean into connection and love and what is working. And that's one thing I've really learned in the research, but also in my own life with my family members. And I'm going to show you a video of my mom. And it's a moment where my mom's quite advanced now, but she kind of came back for a minute into presence. And I really leaned into that presence, even though she's not able to say any kind of consistent sentence. I was acting with her as though she was and really connecting with her in that moment. So I'll just show you that, and then we'll continue.
So then take a video.
I am.
like real mineral water?
No.
Is it quartz?
There's Sigma.
Mom, is it quartz?
Just to sit over there, Mom?
Hey, Grandma. He's cute.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll stop there. So that's kind of a little bit what I'm talking about in terms of this idea of building capacity, that even when something sad is happening, leaning into moments of connection and grace and beauty and how that can help us stay present. So I think before we go on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for 1 minute, and then I'm going to come back. And what I would like us to do before we start, hi everyone, it's nice to see all of you. And if you'd like, please feel free to unmute your camera so we can say hi for a minute. What I would like us to do, just as we start, is maybe to unmute and say something that we notice that we feel grateful for. So we can notice something. We're gonna get more into the science of awe and gratitude, but just to start together, what's one thing that you could notice that you might feel grateful for? And you can say it or you can put it in the chat. And it can be something really little, like the delicious cup of coffee you had this morning. It can be your partner's smile. It can be something bigger, but just something that you notice that you're feeling grateful for. Steve.
Yeah, my wife passed away a couple of years ago, actually in 2019. I'm really grateful for my two dogs. I don't know what I would do without them.
That's
It's
awesome.
been really great. And I loved your video. You got me almost crying there.
Ah, thank you. What are your dog's names, Steve?
Kayla and Khaleesi, they're both huskies. They're asking for food right now, actually.
Awesome. That's great. Animals are so great.
Yeah,
Lovely. Thank you.
right.
Okay, Diane, I think you were going to go.
Me?
Did
I
you?
just wrote it in the chat, but it's the sun and the wind on my face. I enjoy that very much every day.
Beautiful, Diane. So that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. Just noticing those little moments of beauty. Butterfly. Oh my gosh, that's good. I'm just going to read that. Okay, the sun and the wind on my face. Lovely. Butterfly on my window indoor. From where? Yes, wow, amazing. Great. What else? Yes, go ahead, Diane.
What I'm grateful for is my family, my husband, my sons, and my little children.
Ah, beautiful. Yes. Yes. Good. Lovely. My grandchildren. Yes. And just noticing that. And every time we sink into those moments, it's just so helpful. Exactly. A bigger picture, my family, my job, beautiful. Bluma, my grandchildren, yes. Ah, Elizabeth, my daughter's hugs, yes. Kisses and moments giggling together and being silly, yes. Those moments are brilliant. Excellent. Thanks, Elizabeth. What else? What else can we notice? Donna, I feel like you have one. Is that right?
I can say I'm very grateful to begin seeing people and giving semi hugs, and for all those people that have gotten better and are still getting better in
Mm.
whatever they're facing, whatever challenges.
Ah, lovely. Beautiful.
Mm.
Did someone else just unmute? No, I'll read a couple from the chat. I'm grateful for being alive every day. I love to feel alive, and I'm very grateful for my family. I'm enjoying my grandson. Oh, lovely. Hope, my family, the beautiful sunshine. Excellent. I'm grateful to be a volunteer at Hope and Cope and have marvelous persons like Marcella Kickman near me. Ah, that's beautiful, Anique. Lovely. Great. What else? What other gratitude? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm finding like what you're talking about. I find mindfulness takes me right there all the time. Like just for the little tiny things that you appreciate. You hear a clock ticking or you see something, and if you're in that frame of mind, you just go into a whole appreciation thing about life totally. So I found mindfulness really helpful for that.
Yes. That's beautiful that you said that. And that's kind of a little bit what we're talking about, Steve, is this idea of starting to be mindfully aware of those things, to take in the clock ticking. These little things bring us back to presence, and they also just nourish our nervous systems and our whole body. So that's exactly right.
And
Beautiful.
especially if you're a cancer patient and you're because you're always thinking about the future and what's going to happen to you, and if you can bring presence into that and just be present, you can say, everything's okay right now. Like
Yes.
I'm good right now. So it
That's
should,
right.
and whatever's coming in the future is probably quite a bit far in the future compared to what's happening presently right now.
Yes, yes, that's beautiful. It's really interesting what you were saying. I was reading this morning about that the broaden and build theory that I was talking about, and they showed that when people are able to kind of do that and come back into presence, they literally their vision perceptually literally expands. So if they're being shown something on a screen, they'll actually see the big picture. They'll kind of scan back. But people that are living in this other more fight flight future focused, anxiety focused, they tend to just focus on what's right in front of them, and they don't see the big picture. They don't see all the possibilities. So that's exactly right. That idea of like panning back and settling and noticing. That's right. That's right. Good. Other gratitudes before we move on. Oh, there's a little person there. Marie Andre. Lovely. Other anything else that we can notice that we're grateful for? Oh, lovely. The beautiful dogs that I can see walking on the street because I love them and my family. Oh, that's lovely, Natasha. Oh, great. Anyone else have a gratitude they feel like sharing before we go on? I think someone just unmuted. Okay. Okay, good. So we're gonna go on. So what I'm gonna be doing as I go through the gratitude and awe, we're gonna do a few little experiential activities together to kind of bring the nervous system and the research into our bodies and to kind of work at settling our nervous systems a little bit like what we've been talking about. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to explain the nervous system and talk about this idea of a more regulated nervous system versus a nervous system that's future focused and anxious, and the difference and how the research on gratitude can kind of bring us back. So our nervous systems are still coming on and off, but we're coming on and off in a way that we're still quite present. So I'll just kind of show you the difference here. So here is a healthy nervous system. So our nervous systems go into a sympathetic place and then a parasympathetic place. And they're doing it all day long. Even when we breathe in, we have this rise into sympathetic. And when we breathe out, we have this settling into parasympathetic. It's just this normal rhythm of regulation that we're making. Now, if we're rushing to get somewhere, and we'll have a sympathetic rise, and it will be kind of like our muscles will mobilize, our hearts will start beating quicker. There'll be this kind of get ready that will turn on in our bodies, and we'll rush, our hearts start beating. And when we get to where we're going, and if everything goes well, we'll come back down. Our heart will slow down. There'll be this kind of settling effect. And our nervous systems literally do this all day. They go into sympathetic, into parasympathetic. And this is a very natural, important part of our nervous system. Now, if our nervous system goes into a sympathetic rise, what happens as it's rising? So say I have to really get ready and I'm like anxious and I'm like racing to get to work. If I've eaten breakfast, my digestion will turn off and my body says, put all your resources into mobilizing and getting out the door. And that's what happens as our nervous systems are going into sympathetic, into fight, flight, freeze. These other mechanisms will turn off to help us get where we need to go. Or, for example, this happened to me a couple of years ago. I fell off my bike on the bike path. And as I'm falling, my nervous system will go right into a high sympathetic fly up. And my arm will come up to protect my vulnerable head. My body will turn. And it happens very quickly, our sympathetic system. The same if something happens, it's just, we fall on the ice, our arm will come out to protect us. Our sympathetic will turn on very quickly to protect us. It's an amazing, amazing thing that we have in our bodies. Now, so I fall off my bike, I'm settling, maybe I'm kind of, limping to the office. My system will settle. I'll come back down into parasympathetic. Now, what is so important about this system is that this rhythm of regulation needs to work in sync, and it can get out of sync very, very easily. So when I'm in sympathetic, there's this kind of narrowing of my vision. It's a little bit like what I was saying with Steve. When we're anxious, we tend to have this kind of more narrow vision. It's partly due to helping us survive. We kind of tune out things that aren't important and we focus on survival. And at the time, it's very, very important. We just don't want to be doing it all the time. So our vision narrows, our heart rates increase, digestion turns off, all the other body functions turn off when we're mobilizing into fight, flight, freeze. So if something really dangerous happens, like I'm running from a fire, my nervous system is going to shoot up really, really high into fight, flight, freeze. It's going to go way up here. And I'll be running, everything will be working to get me out of the building safely. Now, I get out of the building safely. Oh, I think someone's not muted. Yeah, it's okay. So I get out of the building safely. I realized it wasn't actually a fire. It was a movie set. They were using a smoke machine. It activated the fire alarm. My nervous system will come right back down again. Maybe I see my colleague. We start laughing together. We're kind of engaging. And I'm going to talk a little bit about social engagement and how it helps our nervous system settle. And we'll come right back down into parasympathetic. Digestion will turn back on. A lot of very important body functions happen in parasympathetic. So we literally build neural pathways in parasympathetic. Neurogenesis happens in parasympathetic. We sleep deeply. There's all kinds of cellular turnover that happens when we feel safe and settled. So this system is very important. This system is very important in terms of survival, mobilizing us, protecting us. This system is very important for helping us renew, helping us rest, cellular turnover. All these important functions are very, very important to happen, and they need to happen in tandem. So our nervous systems are doing this. It's a rhythm of regulation all day. Now, sometimes what happens, and this is what is so important to know, is that if there's a lot of stress the nervous system can stay stuck in a state of fight, flight, freeze, where it's not doing this anymore, it's doing something like this. It's coming down a little bit, but it's coming right back up. And the problem with that is that and it's called sympathetic dominance. And sympathetic dominance has been kind of researched now, and it's implicated in a lot of disease processes. Why? Because if the nervous system stays stuck in stress, it's not doing all these important renewal activities in the same way anymore. It's not doing this kind of cellular turnover in the way it needs to, neurogenesis, coming back. The system is staying here, and it's still going a little bit into parasympathetic, but it's staying more stuck on or stuck on off and freeze. So that becomes very complicated, and they're showing in the research of when we have too much stress and anxiety for too long, we can stay stuck in these higher states, and over time it causes this sympathetic dominant, and it can lead to something that is called allostatic load, where it's just basically like the body hasn't had time to settle and renew, and it starts weathering all of our other organs and causing problems over time. So what they're showing in the research is that when we generate positive emotion, what happens is that our vagus nerve so there's a nerve in our spine that I'm going to talk about in a minute called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve tells the body, settle down, you're safe, you've survived the danger, it's over now you can rest. And the vagus nerve is one of the biggest nerves in our bodies. It goes down our back. It's connected to pretty much every major organ in our bodies, the dorsal part. And then there's a ventral part that comes up through our chest and is activated through sound, through eye contact, and through our senses. It's called the ventral vagus nerve. And what can happen if there's a lot of stress, the vagus nerve goes into something called low tone. And when it's in low tone, it doesn't turn on the parasympathetic system to pull it back down as easily. When it's in high tone, it helps people settle down after a stressful event. And what we're going to do are a few activities to help strengthen our vagus nerve. And the research on awe and gratitude is very unequivocal that when we notice the good things in our life, when we generate positive emotion, and we're going to do that more and more as we continue today, what happens is we have more positive social connections. And as we have more positive social connections, we have better vagal tone. And as we have better vagal tone, we have more positive emotion. So this upward spiral effect that's being very studied right now is very powerful in terms of helping our nervous systems come back down in a more regulated state. I hope everyone's following. I know I'm kind of covering a lot of science here. So this mechanism, we're in sympathetic, there's danger, we're stressed, but we're actually safe. We can notice, as Steve was saying, we don't need to be thinking about the future and anxiety. And people will do that. Well, they'll stay kind of stuck on this hypervigilant, sympathetic dominant space instead of noticing what's working, manually bringing their nervous systems back down into this more deactivated space. And the vagus nerve pulls our nervous system down. And when it's working well, because we've generated all these positive experiences, it turns on quicker, pulling us down quicker. So we still go into sympathetic when we need to. If we need to protect ourselves, if there's an emergency, we're able to mobilize and go into those fight, flight, freeze states. But when our vagus nerve works well, it settles us down back faster. So they're showing in the research that when we induce gratitude, when we hang out with what's working, we have better vagal tone and we're more regulated. So we're going to do that in a minute. So this is a good, this is from Peter Levine's work in the States. So he shows that dysregulated, where the nervous system can get stuck on in that sympathetic dominance, or stuck on off and freeze. So stuck on is more of a fight flight state where the person is chronically agitated and hyper aroused and anxious and always worried and thinking about what's next. Or stuck on off where they feel numb and disconnected. And what some people do is they have a nervous system that is stuck on and it's stuck on off. So it'll go from being quite anxious to going kind of in a state of freeze. And what is so important to know about this is that long after the stressful event is over. So say, I'll use this as a kind of a softer example, but say I fall off my bike and something else happens that's stressful and I don't really recover, and my nervous system stays stuck on for a few months after the event. What will happen is something stressful will happen in my life, and it joins with the kind of stress in my nervous system, and I'll get activated faster. But what will also happen is that my inner monologue will be quite fight, flight, freeze. So I'll have more of a negative inner monologue where I'll be like worried and anxious, and I'll have negative self-talk. That's actually the nervous system stuck on or stuck on off long after the stressful experience is over. And that's what I was talking about earlier. And I was working with a doctor this week, and this who's just very competent and just wonderful at what they do. And he was talking about this effect. He was saying, you know, things are really stressful at the hospital. There's all these things happening because of COVID, and then something happened with a surgery, and he was talking about how his nervous system was super activated for a couple of days, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and by Friday he started having all this negative self-talk, like I should have done this, why didn't I do that, why didn't I take care of that, I did that badly. And that's what happens in the nervous system. There's this external stress we're engaging, and then if we don't come back down, we start generating this negative self-talk. And it's just something important to notice. So we're going to start generating some gratitude together, but I want to teach you the nervous system sandwich. And this is something that's being used a lot in people that are especially in frontline settings dealing with a lot of stress, to manually bring their nervous systems down. And we're gonna do it together as a group. So it's a really simple exercise, and the first bun of this sandwich is orientation. And we're gonna activate the vagus nerve in our spines and help ourselves settle a little bit. And you're gonna notice a lot of you will settle down as we activate it. So it's something you see animals do at a watering hole when they're about to drink. They'll kind of go up on their hind legs and they'll orientate to their environment, and they'll literally scan the environment. And they're in a bit of a sympathetic state, but they're looking around. And what do you think they're looking for in their environment? Any guesses? And I'll check the chat. Any guess? What are they looking for in their environment as they're scanning? Danger, exactly. Threats, exactly. That's exactly right. So they're looking for danger in their environment. And we orientate all the time. We just don't notice that we're doing it. The moment we leave the house, we start orientating. We notice who's coming down the street. It's part of our nervous system. We're orientating just to make sure that we're safe. Predators, exactly, Christopher. So we're going to do it in a bit more of a mindful way. We're going to notice our environment. And what I would like you to do is just look around and take a minute to notice. So I want you to let your eyes go where they want to go, and literally turn your head so you activate the vagus nerve in your spine. And I want you to just notice your environment and let your eyes go where they want to go. And as you're noticing, I'd like you, if your feet are on the ground, to wiggle your toes. And just notice that your feet are on the ground and the ground's connected to the floor. And just to notice that you're here. Just to notice this kind of simple here-ness. And see, as you do that and as you look around, if you can work a little less hard on the chair that you're on. See if you can work a little less hard. So I would even take a minute to adjust yourself on the chair. Just see if you can get a little bit more comfortable. And just keep looking around and let your eyes, and notice where your eyes drawn in your room. Where do they want to look? And I would notice taking things that are far away in your room and look at things close up. And notice, and if you can look out your window, and I'd like you to notice, do I feel more settled when I see things close or when I see things far away? When I notice sound in my environment? And I want you to notice if you're a little bit more in the room as you do that, if you're kind of a little bit more here. And if you notice that you've come down, your nervous system is just settled just a little bit. And we're going to push this response a little bit more by either noticing something pleasing in our environment, something that we love that we're looking at, or you can think about a positive memory. And it can be a memory from a long time ago or a recent memory. Some of you wrote about your grandchildren. You could be thinking about your grandchildren's smile. You can be thinking about animals in your life that you love. But just something that just fills you with gratitude. And I want you to notice as you do that, if you notice an expansive feeling in your chest, a kind of settling, that's your vagus nerve literally turning on, and it turns on. We'll feel this kind of warmth expanse, and we'll feel a little bit more here because our nervous systems are deactivating together. And for most of you, what's going to happen now, if you're settling, is you'll start coming back up into sympathetic. It's really normal. Remember I said the nervous system does this. It climbs, it settles, it climbs. And how you'll notice the sympathetic is you'll notice it kind of either like a bracing in your throat or your arms, a little bit of that nervous system mobilizing. You'll either notice it physically, or you'll notice it through a thought that will jump into your mind that's more anxious, like I'm not doing this right, or I need to go take care of that thing. You'll have a more of a sympathetic thought. And if you do, I want you to just notice it. Just notice that bracing. Now we're in the red activating part of the sandwich. And just come back to the more blue deactivating thought that you had earlier, and keep looking around. And it's okay if you're noticing bracing in your throat to just notice it, to just bear witness to it. You want to start noticing your nervous system. There's a tremendous amount of research that shows that the better we get at this noticing, and it's called introception, the easier we can return from stressful events, because we're aware that it's just our nervous system's coming on and off, and it's less frightening, and we can learn how to just stay with it as opposed to avoiding it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So just keep noticing what you're noticing, keep orientating. And one thing to notice, I'm just noticing I'm doing it, if you take a spontaneous deep breath, that's also a deactivating response. Your nervous system is coming down just a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to stop share for a minute just so we can come back. So I'm just curious how that was for people. Did you notice a kind of settling effect? Yeah, Nadia, you noticed that? Yeah? What was that like for people, just to notice that they settled? Did people feel a little bit more in their room? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Yeah, did anyone feel that kind of expansive feeling across their chest? Yeah, you did, Meryl? Okay, good, good, good. That's excellent. So that's that vagus nerve coming on. So one thing that's very helpful to remember as we build this upward spiral effect is when you're noticing something beautiful or leaning into gratitude, something that's working, you want to notice the corresponding settling effect in your body. So Annie, if you're noticing, something beautiful, I don't know, maybe you have cats or something and you're like cuddling. Do you have a cat? No? Okay. So what's something that fills you with gratitude, Annie?
More of a dog person. I have a dog.
You're a dog. Okay, awesome. So say you're like with your dog and your dog is doing something cute, or you're petting your dog. What's your dog's name?
Trey.
Trey. That's a great name. Okay. So say you're petting Trey and you're just like noticing how soft Trey is as you pet him. It's him. Yeah. And just noticing that you want to notice the corresponding expansion in your chest. So it's about generating the good, and we're going to talk about that more as we go, but then noticing the corresponding settling that we feel in our nervous systems. So we're coming back down. So we're wanting to come back down again and again and again. Now, people that are stuck on in that sympathetic dominance, so many people live their lives in this kind of hypervigilant stuck on, and some people live their lives kind of in it's called functional freeze, where the nervous system has gone on too many times and they're kind of in this freeze state. Or as I mentioned earlier, people can go from sympathetic dominance into freeze. They kind of flip back and forth. So they're anxious, 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 and then they watch 8 hours of Netflix and are kind of in this freeze state. So when people are stuck on in this dominant state, there's tremendous bracing. Because remember I said as the nervous system mobilizes, it kind of braces into fight flight. That bracing that happens with people with chronic anxiety doesn't feel good in the body. And when people have a lot of that, what do you think they do manually to come out? People that have a lot of really high sympathetic dominance, what are some of the manual ways people would try to bring themselves out of that state? Any guesses?
Numbing,
Numbing, exactly. And how might they numb?
food, alcohol, drugs,
Exactly.
binge watching, binge buying.
That's right, Nadia. That's right. I'm going to go buy something. I remember just, one of the, I've worked with some lovely people over time, but I always remember this one quote someone said to me, the only way I can feel some kind of calm is by drinking that entire bottle of wine. So people often do a lot of things to manage. It's not that wine is terrible. We all can have a nice glass of wine and feel a little bit more settled. But when we have to drink the whole bottle to settle, it becomes very complicated. And a lot of people with chronic addiction are just medicating trauma. That's all they're doing. They don't want to have these chronic addictions. They're just trying to survive because it feels so uncomfortable in their bodies and in their nervous systems, right? And a lot of us do settling activities that are actually numbing activities, Nadia, like what you said so beautifully, where we'll shop or we'll watching Netflix is super fun, but when you get into like the third episode in one night, you're kind of more diving into that more numbing state. It's not truly rejuvenating the nervous system, right? True rejuvenating would be walking, exercise, reading, settling, all these noticing what's working that I'm talking about. So I'm going to keep going through the research. Are you all following me so far? Yeah, any questions? How is this landing? Is this making sense? Yeah, okay, good. I'm seeing some nods. Just gonna check out. Okay, good. So that little nervous system sandwich we made is something that you can do. If some of you are really interested in helping your nervous system settle, what I just did there, and it's something you can do when you're in a really stressed state, is just take a minute to orientate to your environment. Because it's a little bit what Steve was saying earlier so beautifully, of like when we orientate to our environment, we notice that there's actually no danger in our environment and we can settle a little bit. And you want to really orientate by turning your head, because you're activating that vagus nerve that's coming down your spinal cord. And you'll notice as you do it, as you're orientating and noticing objects in your room, that your nervous system will come down just a little. And you can push it more by doing that second bun of noticing something beautiful. So say Annie's walking to work or school and she's stressed. If she's walking and orientates and notices the bark on the tree, and nature is one thing that settles our nervous system. It's not just about going into nature, it's actually noticing the trees and the leaves, taking in those details. Her nervous system will come down. She might feel a rush of gratitude for the beauty of her walk. Maybe she's walking her dog. She'll settle. So even if there's all this stress in her body from something she's worried about, she can kind of stay with all that red, notice the contraction, notice the stress, but stay with all this other more parasympathetic deactivating. So she'll still feel the stress, but it won't be at these dangerous levels that can cause problems over time. Remember, I talked about sympathetic dominance and disease processes. The body's not coming down into this more regulated state. So you can make the nervous system sandwich multiple times a day even, but especially during a time of stress. So the other thing I'd like you to notice before we go on is just to notice when your nervous system is activated into fight flight and you're stressed, or you're more in that freeze state, what are the things that you say to yourself? What is the internal dialogue? Just notice it for a minute. And I want you to notice if it's a bit of an attacking. So some people are more of a flight internal dialogue, so they'll be more attacking of themselves. I didn't get it right. Like that doctor I was talking about, I need to do this. Why don't I try that harder? But some of us are more fight. So we're more irritated with other people. We're more like, they did it wrong. Why aren't they helping me? And just to start noticing, what is your internal dialogue when you're stressed? And work to think about considering trying to change it a little bit to something that's more compassionate. So I'm not going to have time to go into this today, but if there's time at the end, we'll come back to this. But it's a little bit, the research is really clear about our internal dialogues and trying to come back to self-compassion versus this idea of self-judgment or attack on others, and coming back to this kind of state of belonging. I belong. Other people have felt this way before. Because what they're showing is in this more attacking fight, flight, freeze voice is there's this feeling of I'm alone. I'm not a part of humanity anymore. I'm all alone. And the research on awe and gratitude and also the research on self-compassion is really talking about that we need to come back to the state of belonging and that we're not alone. Other people have felt this way before. Other people have been so stressed like this before. I'm not alone in these thoughts. So we'll come back to that more if there's a bit of time. So one of the researches, there's been tremendous studies about awe, and one of the really clear things that have come out in the research are these three things that I'm going to talk about now. In that when we feel awe, something is created inside us called the small self state. And the small self state is actually a very good state. It's the opposite of entitlement. And I was saying earlier that entitlement's been very linked to depression and anxiety. The small self state is a much more, I belong, I'm part of humanity, how can I help others, feeling connected, feeling part of a community. And in that state, we show much more pro-social behavior, so we're much more likely to help others. We also have a lot less inflammation in our bodies, and awe, out of all the positive emotion studies, interrelates with this ketone in our bodies called interleukin 6. And interleukin 6 is like a pro-inflammatory ketone. So when our bodies are injured, they need to become inflamed. And then as they heal, we want inflammation to turn off. But as we age, interleukin 6 can get quite dysregulated in our bodies. So what happens when we experience awe is interleukin 6 actually regulates and we have less inflammation overall. So that's why they're showing in the research that some of us are able to experience awe very quickly. Some of us are just dispositionally able to experience awe, but it seems like those that don't have the trait of awe can learn how to experience awe more often. One of my favorite studies coming out of Berkeley about awe was a research that they did on trees, and they had a group of people look up at a tree, a giant eucalyptus tree, and then they had another group of people look up at a building of the same height, and they replicated this again and again and again. So one group would look up at a building, one group would look up at a tree, and then for 1 minute in total, and then the researchers would get everyone back on the bus and they'd go back to the research center. And in both groups, as they were walking back to the bus, the researcher would accidentally drop their pens on the ground. And in the tree group, what do you think happened? And you can write this in the chat if you have a hunch. What do you think happened in the tree group? Any hunches? Researcher drops their pens. They picked up the pens, exactly. So this was kind of replicated again and again. So a group looking up at a tree, they picked up the pens, exactly, Steve. So for 1 minute, just for 1 minute looking up at a tree, then you're walking back, and versus looking up at the building, and the tree group would help. They would help the researcher. In the building group, some people still helped, but people didn't help in the same way that those that looked up at the tree. And it was just this amazing pro-social effect that was like instantaneously, that was so fascinating. I'm not going to go into, I think we're going to continue. So let's do we're going to do something from the awe research. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to think about an experience of awe that you've had. And it can be an experience from a long time ago, or it can be experience that happened in the last few weeks. but just a moment where you were filled with a sense of awe. And I'd like you to write down that experience or think about it for a couple of minutes. So just think about that moment of awe, or if you have a pen nearby, you can write it down a little bit in detail. And we'll just take a minute to do that, and then we're going to do something with it. Eric, are you thinking about your experience of awe? Yeah, good. Good. Okay, so we're going to keep going. I'm going to stop the share for a minute because we're going to do something with it. Donna, do you have your experience of awe? Yeah?
I've been dreaming too about I'm always in awe at the ocean and with the waves, and
Beautiful.
I do like to go into the waves too, but then I'm even in more awe when the sun sets with the waves. And so during this pandemic, I'm dreaming about that, and I sometimes look up videos that have to do with ocean and sunsets, and it's very calming.
That's perfect. So maybe what we'll do is we'll do something with your experience. So I want all of you to think about your experience that you just wrote down or thought about. And Donna, you can do this too. And I'd like you to think, we're not going to make the movement, but I want you to think about it. They're showing in the research that when we make a movement in our minds, it's as though we did it. So I want you to think about your experience of awe, all of you individually, and think of 3 movements that capture that experience. So if we were moving together in a group together, we would do this all together, but we won't on Zoom. But 3 movements that capture that experience, and they can be really simple, like just simple movements. It's called a movement sentence. And just think about 3 movements that capture your experience of awe. And I want you to just sit quietly and make those movements as though you were dancing from one movement to the next in your mind. And keep allowing your body to kind of settle into that moment of awe through those movements. And just notice what happens in your nervous system as you do that. And we're just going to take a moment to do that. And just notice what you notice as you do that. Okay. So we're not going to spend too much time because I want to get into the research on gratitude. But does anyone want to share anything they noticed as they did that in their mind, or as they sat with that experience of awe that they'd had? Meryl, what did you notice?
Just sort of a kind of settling of my shoulders myself.
Good. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. Good. So that's also nervous system deactivation. That's beautiful. Anyone else? What did you notice? Nadia, did you notice anything?
An overall calming effect.
Exactly. Good. Okay, good. So that's again, vagus nerve coming on, settling, coming down, a little bit like Donna was sharing too, of settling, thinking about the ocean, dreaming about the ocean. So we're all having less inflammation in our bodies. Anyone else want to share anything they noticed?
Heartbeat slowed down.
Your heartbeat slowed down. Who said that? Sorry?
Barbara.
Barbara, where are you, Barbara?
No picture.
Oh, no picture. Okay. Okay.
No.
Fair enough. Okay, so you notice that's beautiful. So you notice your heart rate slowing down. Exactly. Okay. So that's again, you're kind of settling into a more deactivated parasympathetic state. Lovely. Lovely. Okay. Good. So one thing again, remember I mentioned earlier about that idea of stretching. So it's not that we don't want to be stressed sometimes and mobilize and take care of the things we need to take care of. But when there's a moment of beauty or a moment of awe, to just imagine that you could stretch it. You want to stay with it a little longer. Even if some of you have the tendency to be in your heads and race forward, you want to settle a little bit in those moments of noticing beauty. You're literally taking a multivitamin of good for your nervous systems and your body. You're helping your nervous systems reset, settle. You're building that upward spiral effect that I talked about. And you're going to have more vagal tone. You're going to recover quicker. So when there's a moment of beauty, don't be afraid to take it in. That what needs to happen next can wait. And we just forget sometimes. Sometimes we're cuddling with our grandchildren. A lot of you mentioned grandchildren. And grandchildren can smell delicious. You kiss the top of their heads and they're just these little yummy beings. And like when you're in moments of contact, you want to stay with them a little bit longer. Drink them in. Notice them. If your husband or wife is laughing, take it in, notice it. If one of your kids is coming in, notice it. And we're going to talk a little bit now as we move into gratitude about how it's really easy for us to lean into the negativity bias in our relationships and what we're worried about in our children, or what we're upset about with our partners or upset with our friends. We tend to notice what's not working faster. And what they're showing in the research is when we lean into all the beauty that we can see in our friendships and our children and our partners, that the relationship actually strengthens. And it's a really fascinating concept because I work as a couples therapist, so I work a lot with couples and families, and I read a lot about couples therapy research. And they've shown some fascinating things. They've shown that in the research that sympathetic dominance can really play out in couples. And one thing I forgot to mention is that when we're in that sympathetically dominant space, what happens is the frontal lobe actually turns off. Remember I said there's this energy conservation that happens in the body where digestion turns off and we kind of mobilize into this fight, flight, freeze response. As we're doing that, our frontal lobe, our executive functioning stops working as well. So if we're in an argument with someone we love, we actually won't be able to argue in a very fair way. We won't be thinking clearly. And they've shown couples can actually experience their partners like a predator when they've hooked them up to equipment when they're in this kind of more hyper-aroused state. It's a super fascinating part of the research. John Gottman did all kinds of research on couples. So another piece of research that's so powerful that's just come out is they've shown that in couples, where couples, even if they have terrible communication patterns, it doesn't matter their socioeconomic background or any extenuating circumstances, when couples generate gratitude, they show incredible marital satisfaction over time when they notice how grateful they can be for their partners. And that was something that was really interesting for me because I work so much with couples, and I've noticed in doing the research when I lean into what's working. I'm just going to show you some photos here. When I notice the beauty in my family members, when I kind of lean into what's working, there's tremendous benefits in the relationship. So a lot of you and a lot of us do this where we tend to notice what's not working in our friendships and in our family or things that are more stressful. But we want to get good at noticing what is working. And the research on gratitude, these are just some of my family members, is very unequivocal that noticing beauty, and people tend to be so beautiful when we really notice the beauty of each other, there's a tremendous effect inside of us and in the other person. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about gratitude. So grateful people are more resilient. They have less stress. one amazing study that I read, I won't go into the details of the study because we don't have time, is they showed that people that generated gratitude for 3 months were more physically in shape, they were more resilient, they had less doctor visits, and they had less depression and anxiety. So gratitude seems to help us. There's also incredible research about gratitude at work, and I'm just going to swing back. They're really showing that gratitude at work is probably one of the most important spaces that we can express gratitude. And they're showing in the research that gratitude has to come from supervisors down, that it's more powerful when it comes from the top down. And when people are thanked at work, when they're seen for what they do, they report better work satisfaction across the board. There's just an incredible effect. So one study that I read, that people that had grateful experiences over a 2-week period showed significant increase in happiness, greater satisfaction with life, higher resilience to stress. They had fewer headaches and illnesses. There's just tremendous benefits for showing gratitude at work. And I've been working with a lot of different workplaces, and they show that it can really transform a toxic work situation when there's a gratitude expressed, especially when it's coming from the top down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about gratitude in relationships. So one of the things that's really important is that these are some of the benefits that I was going through earlier, but that gratitude thrives on being very specific. So if I said to Elizabeth, who is the volunteer coordinator, you know, that was really lovely exchanging emails with you. You seem to be super dedicated to your job. That was great. That would be lovely for her. But if I'm specific and I say something like, you know, just your email was so thoughtful. I can tell that you really care about the volunteers, that you have all kinds of integrity, that this matters to you, that you want to make their lives better, that you're thinking of them. When I'm specific, it's going to have much more of an impact on her. And it's true. Right? We want to say things that are true and specific about each other. It has a much greater impact than a kind of a general comment. So we're going to do one last exercise to kind of take in the benefits of gratitude. And what I would like you to do is I would like you to write down on a piece of paper yourself, like you can write down your own name. You can write down a mentor in your life, living or dead. You can write down someone that's challenging in your life. Don't write down the most challenging person. Write down someone who's mildly frustrating. Okay? And I would like you to write down 3 positive qualities. So Elizabeth wrote Elizabeth at the top of the page, so she's going to write down 3 positive qualities that she has. She's going to write down 3 positive qualities about her mentor. And it can be a parent, it can be someone she admires, someone she's close to, someone that's no longer here. It can be anyone but a mentor figure. And then she's going to write down 3 positive qualities about a challenging person in her life. And again, don't pick the most upsetting person. Pick someone that you're mildly frustrated with, okay? And just write down 3 positive qualities. And I'd like you to notice, especially when you write down the 3 positive qualities about the challenging person in your life, I'd like you to notice what happens inside as you do that. And just notice how it feels to notice the beauty inside of you, the beauty inside of your mentor, and the beautiful parts about this challenging person. And just notice what you notice. This is something directly from one of the the large studies that we're doing right now that builds gratitude in relationships. And we're going to do one more activity with this. So I'd like you to choose, it can be someone on this list, or it can be someone outside. I'd like you to take a minute to write a short gratitude letter to someone in your life. and just express how grateful you are to them. And it can be to yourself, it can be to your mentor, it can be to the challenging person you wrote, or just someone else, whoever kind of comes alive inside of you. But just take a minute to write a gratitude sentence, a few sentences. Okay, so we're going to come back. And I would like you to kind of, on that piece of paper, if you've got some room, I want you to kind of be thinking about how could you start to see your life, even if just as an experiment for the next 3 months, as this idea of a gift in motion. And that there's so much that you can be grateful for. And this idea of noticing the small moments of beauty, whether it's a leaf, whether it's your dog's fur, whether it's the cup of coffee, and the bigger moments of beauty, and how you could start to stretch those moments out. And if you're laughing, to laugh longer, to sink into the laughter. If you're cuddling with someone you love, to notice what that feels like. If you're doing an activity that's lovely, if you're sitting with a family member, to notice how wonderful the moment is and to kind of sink into it for a moment. That we're wanting to build these moments, and there's some really practical things that the research suggests. So there can be this idea of putting a learning cue into your life. Like our phones, we look at our phones way too much these days. But to even, they're showing that objects in our life can be reminders of positive things that we can do. So even with your phone, when you pick up your phone, having it be a reminder to notice the beauty around you. It's called a learning cue. It's kind of pairing something that you're interacting with every day that can remind you to do something positive. Or a ring, something that's on your finger, something that you have with you all the time, and just match it to this idea of like, when I touch my necklace, I'm going to remember to notice beauty. The other thing to do is to write a gratitude journal every day. So at the end of the day, just either as you're lying in bed, generate 3 to 5 things that you feel grateful for about your day, or to physically write them down. In the research and long-term studies, that's been a very wonderful effect in terms of making people more resilient, less depression and anxiety, and people feeling more present and in their lives, more in love with the experience of aliveness. So this idea of stretching the gum out again and again and again, leaning into beauty, is something I would just, as an experiment for the next 3 months, to really encourage you, even if life is stressful, even if life is hard, to notice that you can come out of the stress that you're carrying, to just notice what's practically around you and make that nervous system sandwich. So I'm going to just leave a minute for questions and maybe what that writing was like for you. But I'm going to close with a poem, and then we'll come to questions, okay? So this is a poem called Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who's loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. So maybe what we can do is just come back for a few minutes, and we'll just close with some questions. And I'm just curious, what was it like to generate those positive thoughts for a mentor, for yourself, So for someone who's challenging in your life, what did you notice? And from the gratitude letter.
I'll say it was very connecting. And you just take a moment to pause to actually really force yourself to think about something positive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great to learn that you can actually do this. I mean, when I'm doing mindfulness, I didn't realize before that, oh, I don't have to be all off in another place. I can just put effort into, I can behave my way to successfully doing that kind of thing.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Good. Good. Donna.
Yes, just to say, coming back to all of us working with Hope and Cope and some of the very difficult and challenging stories that we hear and try to be of help. And I think it's so important to have balance, to allow the difficult parts to come into people connecting with each other, because I think they need to do that. And then trying to move in directions that are more positive. And so I know Annie's there in the audience, and we tried to do this in a group. But I think the most positive thing about cancer and Hope and Cope people coming together is the connection. And they keep speaking about that they're connected with other people and they're not alone.
Exactly.
And they can come in feeling alone at the beginning of a group and end up feeling much better and connected to others and smiling even more. And it's beautiful to watch.
Oh, that's beautiful, Donna. And that's so much what we're talking about, that, when we can feel connected and we can notice beauty around us, we can also sink into needing to cry together and connect with grief, and we can actually stay present for those experiences. We don't avoid them anymore. We actually can be with them. Yeah.
Sure. Exactly. Grief and anger and all the more difficult emotions, and then coexist with others.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Just noticing some things in the chat too. I feel it best when I can reach out and help someone else. Exactly. It grounds me to practice gratitude and be thankful to be alive. And I would encourage you, if you like to share any of these letters, if you would like to, with the person you wrote them for, if you want. Thank you so much. Very informative. Lovely. Good. Move that energy, not being paralyzed with a bad sensation. Exactly. Yeah, that's really good, Natasha, what you wrote. Exactly. Are there any other thoughts?
Bonnie, I'm just going to interrupt just a few minutes because we have a few minutes left. And of course, there's other thoughts. I want to know if there's any last minute questions.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see there's a hand up.
Hi. So my question is, how important is meditation to mindfulness? And is it not the same?
I mean, I think that's a beautiful question. I mean, I really think if you have the space to do both, like we're kind of talking about mindfulness, Meryl, when we're talking about seeing the bark. We're talking about like feeling your grandchild, you're giving them a little cuddle. If you have a grandchild, those sinking into those moments of gratitude in the way that I'm talking about is a mindfulness practice. It's building that muscle of attention towards what is working, because we tend to notice what's not working much faster, that negativity by nervous system thing I was talking about. So I really think it's about, Steve was saying, oh yeah, it could be this mindful space I'm kind of building as I go, noticing my hands on the steering wheel, noticing someone had that beautiful comment about the wind on their face earlier, but I do think meditation is so helpful because it also builds that capacity to attend. It builds our muscle of noticing and of focus, and that's been unequivocal in the research, that people that even just do 10 minutes of mindfulness meditation a day can focus longer, have more thicker brain regions that mediate focusing. So I think both are so helpful, and I think they feed each other, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a lovely comment. Thank you. Other questions?
I just want to mention something about vagal tone because I think it's such a fascinating area of research. And
Yeah.
I think part of that is, yes, that connection and being able to regulate. And the other pieces of the puzzle are also, what we nourish our bodies.
Yes.
There's a huge body of research coming out with the gut brain axis and serotonin. And so what we feed our body, what we nourish our body, how we move our body, are we
Yes.
providing quality sleep?
That's right.
All of those kind of feed into that whole
Yes.
wellness. And so I really enjoy this part of it. And it's
Wow.
just fun to learn new aspects.
That's beautiful, Natty. I'm so glad you added that. You're right, because they're even showing that exercise also builds vagal tone. And what you
Yeah.
just said about what we eat, having like a salad's going to be very different to our vagus nerve in our bodies than having several poutines, even though it's fun sometimes. But you're right, wellness and what we put in, it's all connected. And sleep is also so implicated, right? Into that space we were talking about regulation. We tend to be much more vulnerable to more higher fight, flight, or freeze states when we don't have a ton of sleep in our bodies, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Is that who's saying that?
Well, I think somebody broke up there. Whoever said that, you want to repeat that question or comment?
I love what Mona just put in the chat too about touching a necklace to remember. That's exactly right. Lovely. Yes. She's got it right there with her epic background. Thank you, Mona. Exactly. Or you can put it in the chat, whoever just broke up with their question. Yeah. Yeah, I find those learning cues really helpful, Mona. It's just like, oh, yes, sink in for a minute. It was lovely. Thank you for bringing that back. Other questions or comments? Natasha, Annie, anyone? I feel like
Well, maybe I'll just make a finishing comment and thank you, Bonnie. This was very, very, very pleasant and it was very timely. And I can certainly say, and I'm sure I'm saying it on behalf of everybody who was here, it was very enjoyable. So on behalf of Hope and Cope and the volunteers and the staff, thank you so much for taking the time and for really, walking us through all of this. I want to thank you on behalf of Hope and Cope.
I'm so happy to be here, and you guys, you're all so touching, and you're doing beautiful work. And if you'd like to close, just write. One of the things I do with my graduate students is just to say, what's alive inside of you, given what we've talked about? What do you notice is alive inside of you? That might be a nice way to close. And you can unmute or you can put it in the chat. What's alive inside of you, given this discussion? Donna, do you want to say?
Well, it's a nice, yes, I was just about to say that. It's just a good warm feeling I have about being with you and meeting some of the others virtually. Many I don't know, but I look forward to meeting you, hopefully in beautiful Hope and Cope in person one day. And seeing you on some of the Zooms is second best, but great to be with you all, and we're all together. That's good.
Yes.
What's your dog's name?
This is Betsy.
And
she just arrived from the Dominican, so she's adjusting to the cold here.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
And it has made me. I've had 3 dogs, and I'm without one right now, so I'm really missing. They're beautiful to have.
Yeah, they're so
maybe
cute.
getting another.
Lovely. So any other, gratitude, my passion for life, gratitude and joy, these are in the chat. Any other comments? What's alive inside of you? What do you notice?
The need to explore.
Hello.
Sorry, what did you say, Natasha?
I say hello. Well, I'd like to know if it could be possible to have another session about gratitude, about that kind of themes, because I realized that obviously that was a very good presentation, but I know that this is a big topic to talk about. It's not as simple. There are many aspects to analyze, and I don't. We can be able to get access to the information with.
I'm going to make a reservation. Perfect.
Someone's multitasking. So Natasha, that was a lovely comment. Yeah, I think that that's something that gratitude's a huge topic. You're right. You're right. And it's so funny, Natasha, doing this research, it's funny because I present it and I work and I forget to do it. And then I read the research and I remember the music of it. I'm like, oh, this is what I need to be doing. But we all forget, right? So
Like
you're
that.
right. Something about that being reinforced again and again, that's so important. Yeah, in all the ways that we can. And I hear you. Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's possible. So maybe we'll just close. So Hope, Linda Gold, Meryl, thank you. Gratitude and joy. Lovely. Any other, Elizabeth, you were going to say one, I think?
Just need to explore and learn and grow still. Gives me a lot of joy just thinking that there's so many things to discover.
That's lovely.
Still a kid.
Yes. Beautiful. And Diane, if there has one, go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Try again, Diane.
What's alive inside of me is my heart. That's all.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. Lovely to meet all of you. You're doing beautiful work out there.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you very much.
Everybody for attending. Thank you for taking the time.
A lot. That was great, Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So glad to be with all of you.
It was really great. Thank you.
Thanks for